Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today, we're going to take a trip back in time,
Back in time.
back to the 1950s.
Oh, okay.
Think poodle skirts, drive-in movies, and
Wow.
that constant fear of, communists lurking around every corner.
Ah, the Cold War.
Exactly, the Cold War. But get this, amidst all that tension and paranoia,
Hmm.
something else was happening. People were seeing aliens.
Aliens, huh? Like the little green men from Mars kind of aliens.
Nope, not quite. These were different. These were friendly aliens.
Only aliens?
Yeah, human-looking, even. And they came with messages of peace.
Okay, so friendly aliens with messages of peace during the Cold War. Interesting. What's the catch?
Well, that's where things get a little weird.
Weird how?
Their messages of peace often came with, let's say, a certain political slant.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these peace-loving, politically minded aliens.
These folks, these people who met the aliens, they became known as contactees.
Contactees. Got it. So how did this whole contactee thing start?
Well, it really took off in the early 1950s. Unlike the alien abduction stories that would freak everyone out later, these were more like positive encounters.
Positive encounters. So not your typical alien invasion scenario.
Not at all. More like space brothers coming to give us some friendly advice.
Space Brothers, huh? That's a new one. So who were some of these contactees?
Well, one of the most famous was a guy named George Adamski.
George Adamski. Okay. What'd he claim to see?
Okay, so picture this. It's 1952. Adamski's out in the California desert.
California desert.
Yeah, and bam, a flying saucer plops down right in front of him.
A flying saucer, of course. What happened next?
Out steps this, super handsome alien. His name was Orthon.
Orthon from the flying saucer. All right, go on.
And get this, Orthon was from Venus.
Venus, huh? That's a hot commute.
Right. Anyway, Adamski's encounter with Orthon became like the contactee story of the time.
So Adamski meets this handsome Venusian Orthon. What happened? Did they, go for coffee?
Not quite. Orthon had a message, and it wasn't about lattes. He warned about nuclear war, which, everyone was scared of back then.
Makes sense given the whole Cold War thing.
Right. But then there's the twist.
A twist.
Yeah, Orthon also started talking about communism.
Hold on, communist aliens. Now that's a new one. What was Adamski's reaction to all of this? Was he like a secret communist sympathizer or something?
Well, it's hard to say what Adamski's personal politics were, but he wrote a book about his encounter called Flying Saucers Have Landed.
Catchy title. Did it sell well?
Oh, yeah, it was a bestseller. People ate this stuff up, especially with all the Cold War anxiety swirling around.
So flying saucers, a handsome alien, and messages of peace with a side of communism. Sounds like the perfect recipe for a government freakout, right?
Oh, you bet. The FBI, they were already on high alert for any whiff of communist influence.
So how did they react to Adamski and his space communist friend?
They took him seriously, that's for sure. Thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, we now know the FBI had a file on Adamski over 130 pages long.
130 pages. Wow. They really went deep on this guy. What were they so worried about? Did they think Adamski was actually a communist agent spreading propaganda?
It wasn't so much about Adamski himself. What they were really worried about was the potential for communist ideas to spread through these alien stories.
Okay, I see. They were worried these seemingly harmless tales of space brothers were actually a clever way to sneak in communist propaganda.
Exactly. In their eyes, these aliens, whether they knew it or not, were being used as pawns in the Cold War.
A Cold War fought with flying saucers and messages of peace and communism. Wild. So, was Adamski the only contactee the FBI was keeping tabs on?
Oh no, he was just the tip of the iceberg. There were others out there, all claiming to be getting messages from these benevolent, politically minded extraterrestrials.
Others. Tell me more. Who else was on the FBI's radar? It's like they took these very real fears of, communism, nuclear war, and projected them onto these otherworldly encounters.
Yeah, like the aliens became a kind of a blank slate for all those anxieties. But there's another thing that strikes me.
What's that?
The government's reaction to all of this, it's almost like a preview of the whole UFO secrecy thing that would come later. Like Area 51 and all that.
Interesting point. You could definitely see a connection there. From open investigations into contactees, we go to a much more secretive approach to UFOs later on.
Right. So we're seeing this shift towards secrecy. But let's get back to Britain for a second. We were talking about the Aetherius Society and British intelligence keeping tabs on them.
Ah, yes. The Aetherius Society. So they believed that their alien contacts were giving them specific instructions.
Instructions for what?
Well, for one thing, a plan for achieving world peace.
World peace, huh? That sounds pretty harmless. What's the issue then?
It wasn't just about peace. They also believed that these aliens were guiding them towards some kind of, well, spiritual enlightenment.
Okay, so not just world peace, but a whole new level of consciousness,
Hmm.
guided by aliens. I guess I can see why that might make some people nervous.
Especially the authorities.
Yeah, I bet. Did they think the Aetherius Society was becoming like a cult or something, with these aliens as their leaders?
It's certainly possible that that was a concern. Any group claiming to have this kind of special connection to a higher power, especially if it's aliens, is going to raise some eyebrows.
Right, especially during the Cold War. Any kind of alternative thinking, anything that challenged the status quo, was seen as potentially dangerous.
That's right. And the contactees, with their stories of benevolent aliens and their unconventional ideas, they were definitely challenging the established order.
It's almost like they were accidentally poking at the very foundations of power and authority,
Exactly. They were suggesting that there might be other ways of organizing ourselves, other ways of thinking about the world.
which of course made those in power pretty uncomfortable.
To say the least. The authorities, they like to be in control, right?
Absolutely. So the contactees, by introducing these new ideas, this new way of seeing things, they were, in a way, threatening that control.
Precisely. It makes you wonder, though.
Wonder what?
What if they were right? What if there really are these benevolent aliens out there trying to help us? Would we even be open to it?
That's a good question. Would we just dismiss them as crazy, like they did back in the 50s? Or would we be willing to listen?
It's something to think about, isn't it? We tend to fear what we don't understand.
Definitely. But I think there's another important aspect to this whole contactee thing that we haven't talked about yet.
Oh, what's that?
Belief.
Ah, yes. Belief at the heart of it all.
Right. These individuals, whether they were, genuinely convinced they met aliens or just looking for attention, they tapped into something really powerful.
Absolutely. A human need for meaning, for connection, for something beyond ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They offered this vision of, well, of a world where we're not alone, where there's something greater out there looking out for us. And that really resonated with people, especially during such uncertain times.
It's true. And it's amazing how these stories, even though they were often outlandish, managed to capture the public's imagination.
And not just back then. They continue to fascinate us today. They planted a seed of wonder that's still growing.
It's true, and that's part of the legacy of the contactees. They helped to popularize the idea of alien life. They made it okay to think about these things.
Yeah, they help to break the taboo. But we can't forget about the darker side of this whole thing, right?
What do you mean?
The government's reaction, their files, their investigations.
Mm.
It reveals this deep fear of anything that might disrupt the status quo.
A fear of the unknown. And unfortunately, that fear often manifests as suspicion, as hostility.
It's a cautionary tale, isn't it?
Right.
A reminder that we often meet the extraordinary with fear and denial.
But the contactees, with their stories of friendly aliens and messages of peace, they offer a different perspective.
A perspective of openness and curiosity.
Exactly. They remind us that the universe is vast and full of mysteries, and that maybe, just maybe, what we find out there won't be so scary after all.
Maybe. But we've got to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Wow.
We've talked about the contactees, their encounters, the government's reaction, but there's one more thing we need to explore.
Oh, and what's that?
The question of legacy. What impact did these contactees have on our understanding of UFOs and the possibility of extraterrestrial life? We'll dive into that and more in the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back, deep divers. We're wrapping up our exploration of 1950s contactees and their friendly, sometimes politically charged alien encounters. But did this whole contactee thing just fade away? Or did it leave a mark on how we see UFOs and alien life today?
It's fascinating, really. Mainstream science and the media mostly brush them off, but
Right.
the contactees, they really shaped the whole UFO narrative. Their stories, even the ones that sounded a bit out there, they made people think about aliens.
So they kind of made it okay to talk about UFO.
Exactly. Before that, it was all little green men and invasions.
Right, and the contactees come along with their space brothers and messages of peace.
It changed the whole conversation.
It's wild how something so fringe can become part of, well, how we think about things today.
It's true. They opened people's minds to the idea that we might not be alone, and that maybe, just maybe, those aliens aren't so bad after all.
So they were kind of like pioneers, even if their stories were, well,
A little out there.
Yeah, a little out there, but they made people think, right?
They did. They challenged the accepted view of things. They forced people to consider possibilities they might not have otherwise.
And that includes scientists, right?
Even scientists. Even though many were skeptical, they had to start addressing the bigger question of extraterrestrial life.
Because these contactees were out there talking about it, whether the scientists liked it or not.
It's precisely. It became a topic worth discussing, researching. The contactees, they nudged the conversation forward.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. These folks, often labeled as, cooks or attention seekers.
They really did help shape how we think about one of the biggest questions out there: are we alone?
And they didn't stop at just saying aliens exist, right?
Agreed.
They changed the way we picture them.
Right. Before it was all monsters and invasions, all fear.
And the contactees said, hey, maybe they're not so different from us. Maybe they even want to help.
It was a huge shift in how we see the possibility of alien life.
And it wasn't just a feel-good story. It really made an impact.
It did. It made people less afraid of the unknown, more open to the idea that there might be something else out there.
So the contactees, they left behind more than just some wild stories. They gave us a new way of looking at the universe.
And at ourselves.
And that's something worth remembering. So the next time you hear about UFOs or aliens, remember the contactees.
Remember those who dared to imagine something different, something more.
And who knows? Maybe someday we'll find out they were right all along.
Maybe.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored this fascinating chapter in UFO history. Until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and never be afraid to wonder.